what I want to do is kind of gauge where you guys are at. Everybody should know something about what this word means, economic, right? But this, I would be surprised if you had a really well-formed understanding of what the word institutions means, right? Because I don't think anyone does. It's sort of a strange word that everybody thinks they understand and they use, but everyone has a different interpretation of what it means, right? So what do we do in cases where everybody has a different interpretation of a word? Yeah, we make our own definition. So this is wonderful. I love talking about institutions because I get to make it up. Not really. I read other people and I try to represent what I think they mean. So here's what I get. And so what I want to do is just remind you that the way I'm lecturing to you is an invitation to inquiry. I don't propose to know the final answer to anything. I just have worked harder at it than you have up to now, right? You'll probably beat me in a couple of years, but you know, let's start this conversation. Anything you want to say about this, jump right in, right? I'm going to give you examples. If you think my examples are not very useful, give me another example, because I can improve you. We can understand this together. Okay, institutions, formal rules, informal norms. All right, so what I like about the way you divide this up is rules, formal, norms, informal. What's a norm?
Normal, what people do.
Yeah, it's sort of what we expect, right?
As opposed to weird, that weird kid who sits in the corner eating dinner at breakfast.
No, but even we know what a weird kid is, right? Because you're starting to describe what a weird kid is, right? Sitting in the corner eating breakfast by themselves, you know, stuff like that. So we know what a weird kid is. We can fit that into a category because we have norms about that is. There are no rules, right? You don't qualify. You don't get a certificate that says weird kid, right? You could, right? But we can do that without explicit rules. We can do that just with norms, right? That's kind of what we mean by norms. So formal rules are going to take on a particular character of trying to be explicit about them. They're going to be articulate. They're going to be a result of a conversation, and they're usually going to have some sort of explicit enforcement mechanism or incentive tied into working with rules. Norms are going to be more organic. They're going to form without an explicit conversation, and the incentives or the responses to those norms are not going to be nearly as concrete or transparent, right? So that's what we're working with. So here's an example. Why would an apartment building put up this sign, "Be a good neighbor, pick up after your dog"? Yeah. So in an apartment building, typically there is enough density of people and their dogs that there's a limited space of grass, right? So if you don't pick up, it's just going to be covered. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. I've lived in several apartment buildings. One is to put up a sign like this and say, "Pick up after your dog." What happens if people don't pick up after their dog? There's poop everywhere. That's one outcome, right? And then everybody's just really upset and filthy.
It's written somewhere the fact that they have to.
They have to. What happens if they don't? You could be fined, right? So one of the property manager could walk around, you know, writing everybody down and fining everybody. That's one way to deal with it. Another way to deal with it, I thought it was a pretty creative way. My apartment building, when we first moved to Logan, what they did is they just said, "Look, we're not going to enforce this. It's not fun for us. It's not fun for you to be fined. So guess what? If you have a dog, we're going to assess you a fee up front once a month, and we're going to pay somebody to pick up the poo every day. So you're going to pay somebody's salary." And there are enough people in the apartment complex that there was enough for, you know, the landscaping guy, part of his job was to pick up all the poo. Right? That's another way to deal with it. But in other words, we have a problem, we articulate particular outcomes, we announce ahead of time what everyone's going to do, we assess a fee, either ex post from the action or ex ante, like I gave you the example there. All right, speed limit 3. 3. Yeah. 3. 3.
You can't even post.
Right. Okay. Is this an effective rule? It's a rule, right? And we all know what happens if you speed. Right? We all understand it.
That current speed, or that particular speed is not very.
If you were a turtle, then maybe, but
Yeah, if you were a turtle, this would be fast.
We don't have that rule, I don't understand it.
Yeah? So it's a rule, but we also have this visceral reaction. It's not a very effective rule. What about this? I don't know if everybody recognizes, but This is U.S. Constitution. Is that a rule?
I don't really think of it as a rule.
It's not a rule?
Yeah.
Does it qualify for rules? It's articulate, right? We know what's in the document. Are there penalties if you don't obey it? Well, are there meant to be penalties if you don't follow it? All right. Okay. So this would qualify as a rule. So let's distinguish these different types of rules. I mean, so which one is the most removed from your day-to-day life? Yeah, the last one, the Constitution, right? For if you own a dog, you know, you're dealing with that multiple times per day. Right? Speed limit, maybe you're dealing with all the time as well if you're driving. Okay, so these are rules, and they can be either closer to you or further away, more abstract, less abstract. They're all different levels of rulemaking that we could follow. Let's also look at informal norms. What's this, by the way? Is it a dress code? That's a professor, I think. That's how I would interpret it. What's this? Pedestrians, people on the street. What are they doing? Did somebody say shopping? Or did I just think somebody said it because that's what I was going to say?
Shopping.
Shopping, okay. So I searched, this is on the first page of Google results for professor. I was kind of impressed by how similar these pictures are. All right? First of all, why is this professor? Gray hair, mustache. You know, look at the striking contrast between these two pictures. Regular tie, bow tie, blazer, vest. These are the differences. Does this capture the full range of what a professor is? Is it a caricature? Is it useful information? If I don't dress like this, so I'm not wearing a bow tie and I'm not wearing a vest, am I a professor? Cool. It's a norm, right? There's no rule. There's no official thing. Could I wear a ball cap? I meant to bring my ball cap in and put it on to show you how absurd I look in a ball cap.
At some schools you probably keep.
Do your professors wear ball caps in general when they lecture?
No.
Is that a rule?
Yeah.
Where do you go to school?
NDSU.
Yeah, and it's explicitly a rule.
It's not. It's a common courtesy.
Right.
Like you just pick it up.
But we know it's not courtesy. When you guys graduate, when you take on, how many people are going to work for a living, or how many people are going in academia? You guys are going to work for a living or go into academia?
I'm in academia.
Okay, so you're in academia. So how many people are going to work for a living? All right. At the job you take, will they let you wear a baseball cap at that job? Do you anticipate that to be true? Maybe?
I know that at my job you said yes.
What kind of jobs allow you to wear baseball caps?
Baseball.
You could be a baseball player. That's a very good job to wear a baseball. Blue collar job, food service. That kind of stuff. How could we even start to, and there's no rules about, well, in the case of uniforms there are rules, but there, you know, how could we even start dividing society up into these categories? We have norms. We function with certain stereotypes and norms that just sort of guide our behavior. What you guys chose to wear to this conference reflects something about what your anticipation of your cohort was going to be. Bad example. All right. What I chose to wear to the conference is a reflection of what I think the norms of the conference are, right? It's summer, so I'm not wearing a blazer, I'm not wearing a bow tie, because I would just sweat, and so I admire that you did it, thank you. I would like to, but it would smell. So I don't do it. Okay, so this is a professor. How do you get through this crowd? I mean, think about the problem of social coordination that we're solving every time we enter a situation like this. It terrifies me, so I just stay in my office on campus. I don't really go out into crowds. But you guys probably go out into crowds. You probably go to concerts, you go shopping, all of those things which I try to avoid.
Oftentimes it depends on where you're from, whether or not you're supposed to walk on the right or the left-hand side of the road.
Right.
I mean, obviously some people don't abide by that, but I feel like that's sort of the best rule.
Yeah, so when I was at George Mason, I used to read when I walked across campus because I was trying to enforce social norms of walking on the right. And so I would often bump into people. But I was providing social disapprobation for people that weren't following the rules of the road on the sidewalks, right? My friends wouldn't walk with me because of this.
And this sort of thing is, I guess, what they call self-enforcing, right?
Right.
If everyone's walking on the right, but you want to be contrarian, yeah, you may bump into someone, maybe bump into the wrong person. Same thing with driving. If you drive on the left, besides it taking you risky.
In a car, you don't see people being contrarian, right? I mean, how many times have you guys driven on the left just because you're sick of driving on the right?
Not so much more than you.
Okay, that's an official rule, but when you get on the sidewalk, you behave differently, right? Do you guys sometimes walk on the left? How does that work? That's crazy. Right? Aren't you just running into people? How do you decide which one of you is going to move out of the way?
Sometimes, if I'm walking in the neighborhood, I just ignore the sidewalk and I just walk on the road because there's more space.
Okay, yeah, you walk on the road. There are fewer people on the road, right?
Yeah.
Yep, so it's easier that way. But to me, this is an amazing example of social coordination, the fact that I am walking across the sidewalk and people make decisions every moment that they, besides for me, who I was reading and purposely intending to run into people, just to test my theories. You guys don't bump into people when you walk across campus very often, do you? So how do you do that? How do you emerge with rules about how you get through a crowd, or how you get through a concert, or how you shop, and who gets in line where, and all this kind of stuff? You've got this amazing amount of investment in social capital, understanding what expectations are and how to behave when people violate expectations, that you go through every day. Right? So we can point to the rules. One of the nice things about rules is that they're very transparent, and we can see the rules, and we know what they are. We can look them up. But the majority of social coordination, I would argue, happens by things that we can't articulate, which makes it very difficult when you have people, going between countries, right? So if you go to a different country, I deal with this quite a bit when people come from Asia. What about plagiarism? What does that mean? It's my responsibility of a teacher to make sure that I'm very clear up front with my students from the partner universities we have in China to understand what plagiarism is, what the expectation is. Because if not, you get into very uncomfortable situations which, through no anticipated conflict, people do things that are violations of our honor code. Okay? And once they learn it, they're fine. They just didn't know, honestly, didn't know that the expectation was different. Right? So working in this world of social capital where you know a bunch of different norms that you just take for granted, it becomes particularly obvious when you start moving between cultures. So in Germany, if you start washing your window, don't be surprised if your neighbor from across the street comes over and tells you how you could better do it. Something as simple as you're going side to side, and the correct way is to go up and down because less light reflects off the streaks that way. They'll just offer this advice because there's a way to do it. And you didn't know, obviously, otherwise you would be doing it that way. Okay, so the expectation is different. If you ask someone, I know this because my wife's German, if you ask somebody, how does my hair look? They get very uncomfortable because you're American. And they go, do you want me to answer like I would answer, or do you want me to flatter you? Because normally, in my experience, Americans just want to be flattered. But I'll answer your question if you want to know. Okay, so let's go back and look at the different examples on a whole, right? So we've got formal rules, informal norms. We're going to move between these things. There's going to be advantages and disadvantages to both of these. Rules help to increase efficiency. The reason we articulate formal rules is because we want to be able to look them up. We want everyone to know what it is. So in the case of plagiarism, I have to announce ex ante what plagiarism is so that everyone, regardless of their background, knows what it is, and then I can hold them to that standard. Otherwise, it would be unfair to enforce the penalty, right? We just can't assume everyone's on the same page. We have to give them someplace they can look it up and understand the rules. All right? Norms, though, are adaptable. This is the real advantage of norms. These change all the time. The fact that I can wear, not a suit to present is something, the adaptability and the flexibility that I'm provided by having norms that dictate my behavior rather than rules. All right? And as long as we all kind of have a general idea of what those norms are, it doesn't become a problem. It only becomes a problem when people start routinely violating the expectation of the person holding the conference, and then they have to make a rule, right? So a great example of this is when I worked for State Farm. I worked in a call center at State Farm, and they had Casual Friday. Well, when they first started it, they had no rules. And every week they'd add on average about 3 rules about things that you can't wear on Casual Friday. And it was interesting because first they said no spandex pants, and then they revised it later to say no spandex at all. There had to be a separate rule added to, because people had different ideas of what pants were. Yeah, so. All right. So you add rules to create clear expectations. You get out of this efficiency. That sounds great. That's an economic improvement. Maybe we should articulate all rules. What would happen if we did articulate all rules? Right. There are a huge number of norms out there that we would have to articulate. And by the time we articulated them, the circumstances surrounding that would change, right? So the nice thing about norms is they're adaptable. Everybody sort of in real time understands how those things change. Okay, so the state of dress in US corporations has changed dramatically. If you tried to articulate all the different things that women could wear to work, it would be very difficult. It's summer, right? What's the difference between a nice leather dress shoe and a flip-flop, women?
Well, where I work, you can't wear sandals.
No open toe, right?
You can have open toe, but it has to be like a pump, and it can only be like the top.
So if it has a heel, it's not a flip-flop. Okay?
And it can't, like, there can't be any.
So dress flats with open toes are not allowed.
No.
But are those flip-flops?
You can't have something between your toes.
Okay, no thong part of the sandal.
Yep.
Does that make sense? Is that clear? Does that solve the issue?
No.
No?
There, I mean, like, is that's not clear enough. Like for sandals, there are sandals that don't have that part.
So there's something you would wear out with a dress that isn't a flip-flop that has a thong on it. Okay. Right? Very difficult subject, right? I don't fully understand it. But we can start talking about all the different decisions. Men's clothing, unfortunately, is a bit more like a uniform. So it's more categories and more articulated rules. Makes it easier to launder it, for example, which is why men's clothing is cheaper to launder. So that's an advantage, right? Efficiency. But men aren't very known for looking very good, right? Except when they're wearing a full suit or bow tie, blazer. All right, so let's start thinking about markets in terms of what they're trying to do as an institution. So if you agree with me, if you call something a market, you're going to have a legal foundation somewhere that has private property. I think that's what we mean. All right? And then the main mechanism, once you have property, is to allow for this little dude here to make individual choices. Okay? So it's an explicit choice to articulate an institutional organization in order to get certain benefits. All right? A market is simply an institution. Is it formal or informal? Well, at least at this highest level, right, at the constitutional level, at the very abstract level, it's an explicit choice to have private property and individual decision making. Okay? A lot of things within that happen spontaneously by norms and all that other stuff, but at least at the most abstract level, we think there's a legal system backing up and summarizing that all as private property. Okay? That's what we think of as a market. All right, so what's the purpose of this game? How does a market function? I'm going to give you a way to think about this. So we want to look at the 3 I's. This is what we want out of a market. I'm going to argue that the only way that you can justify the use of the market is if the market that you set up delivers on these 3 things. Okay? So these become fairly important for me in describing why we would want a market. If you can improve on it, if you could come up with a system without private property that does these things, great, let's do that. I have no particular loyalty to private property. I just think it works. So I'm going to state my case. What are incentives?
Desire.
What's it? A fire? Desire. Desire. Okay. That's good. What else? What other things would you associate with incentives? Okay.
Money.
Money?
Yeah, just reward in some
Reward?
way.
Yeah, if somebody's doing something cool, you want them to do it again. Right? So as long as they feel like it was cool for them as well as for you, they'll do it again if there's some sort of incentive. So whatever that means, what we want is someone to feel like whatever they did that was socially beneficial, contributed to social coordination, was worth doing again.
Isn't there like an experiment by B.F. Skinner, I think it is, or I think where the rat is reinforced by
Yeah, so one of the things about rational choice is you can abbreviate rat choice, and it's funny because the experiments were all set up with rats. Right? So rational choice is anything you can get rats to do that follows the same patterns of behavior that humans do, and that's kind of rational choice thinking, which is an important part for public choice, but we'll talk about that after lunch with public choice. So incentives are generally things that make it worthwhile to do socially beneficial things again, right? At least that's the ideal. That's what you would want. Information, what does that mean? Well, the market contains a bunch of information about relative scarcity. So if you follow the idea of division of labor, then what you have is all these different people in this room have specialties. They know something about, doing something. How many people here can drive a nail in like 2 whacks? Drive a nail with a hammer. Okay? Anybody cannot do that without damaging what they're trying to drive a nail into. Okay? All right? Those are different skills that you pick up. But we get to, as a society, take advantage of all the different skills people accumulated by trading with each other, right? So how do we find out who's got those skills? Do I just stand up and ask everybody? No, we think that in a market economy, those people that can get incentives by sharing their skills will make that publicly known. So you get information about all the different things that people can do. I bet if we surveyed all the languages in this room, we'd come up with quite an interesting number of languages that people speak. I know we've got English, Spanish, German, Bulgarian.
Klingon.
You speak Klingon? You speak it or read it?
Neither.
Oh,
I'm just kind of throwing it out there.
Well, that doesn't. We can't count it until somebody speaks it or reads it. Yeah.
Big Latin.
Latin. Okay. So we're up to 9. Very quickly, just
A little bit of Italian.
Yeah. Cool. So we've got a bunch of different languages. So if we, as a group, had to interact globally, we could start. Did you add anything to that? So if we did that, we would have all this information now about that. If somebody came up and just started speaking Italian, we'd find very quickly what level of Italian competency we had, right? Once we start interacting, we reveal this information, right? What the argument is that markets, through the coordination of all different people acting in order to chase incentives, share information, okay? So it's just a mechanism of social coordination. Are there incentives that make you part with information? Oh, sorry. Also, innovation. What does innovation mean? Well, this means that people that do things over and over again start coming up with new ideas or new ways of seeing things. You deal with the same problem multiple times, you start thinking of the problem in a different way. And maybe you've had this experience. You've beaten your head against the wall on a particular issue until you saw it in a different way. That's what I think of as innovation. So do people share the information of innovation? Do people get a different way of seeing anything when they specialize in a market and start doing things in trading? Right? My claim would be yes. But this is what we really want. Why? Because this is the progress. The idea, I told you yesterday about Menger's 4 components of a good. Getting knowledge is eliminating error, understanding causal processes. So when people start understanding those things and sharing that knowledge, the economy grows and creates wealth. Okay? That's what we want. All right? And I do not expect you to wholeheartedly yet agree that what I'm about to tell you delivers on that. Okay? These are the 3 Ps. To get the 3 Is, I would argue under particular circumstances, you need the 3 Ps. That means that there are instances where you can get the 3 Is without the 3 Ps. We're going to explore what those instances are, right? But the goal is to get the 3 Is. I'm going to say these are really important in a market to produce the 3 Is, the 3 Ps. Property rights, having the ability to know who owns something so that you can transfer it. right? So if this is my clicker, it can become Nick's clicker when we agree to transfer the property, right? The whole legal construct is allow for clear transfer. It creates formal rules, it allows for transparency, it allows for efficiency. That's what we're after. If it doesn't do those things, it's not worth anything. So the empirical claim is that that happens much easier and better under the legal system of property rights. Then you have prices. What do prices tell you? Prices are just a way to summarize all opportunity cost. What do we think of? So coffee, how much does a cup of coffee cost?
Do we mean at Starbucks or normally?
How much did you pay for your last cup of coffee?
0.
This morning, yeah.
I'm so
$2.
Yeah. $2, okay? $3.50, right? Somewhere between $2 and $3.50. What that says is everything else you could spend that money on, is it more valuable to you than a cup of coffee at this particular time and place? And if you purchase it, you are implicitly saying no, right? That's the information that's given up by prices. You're at least vaguely aware that you could spend your money on other things other than what you're spending on them at the moment, right? Even in the future, you could save it and spend it later. You're at least aware that that's a possibility, even if you're not very clear about what it is. Prices are a summary of all opportunity cost. Everything else you could have spent that money on. What you're basically saying is that I'm trading my labor for an array of goods, and I'm going to allocate some of it here, some of it here, some of it here, some of it here. That's what prices do. They allow you to take your labor and allocate it to consumption items, either now or in the future. Profit and loss. This is really important, and it seems like no one understands this when you look at the market. Because everyone likes profit, right? But what do we do when people lose? Well, it was unfair, the market conditions were bad, I didn't know, I'm too big to fail, right? Loss is ugly. Nobody wants to take loss. So in a system that allows to personalize the profit, everybody that profits gets to keep it, but if they lose, they get to socialize the cost, that's not going to work, okay? So it's an empirical question. In your particular governmental situation, when people profit, do they keep it? If they don't innovate. But if they lose, can they get somebody else to pay for it? If they can, it's not providing the information about what is successful and what is not. So you can't evaluate the outcome of a market without profit and loss. Unless people that make errors get revealed for making errors by losing their opportunity to make future errors with their capital, then you're not going to have any information generated. Okay? And all of this then would, out of this comes innovation. People chase profit, they innovate in order to get future profit, always trying to stay one step ahead of everything else. So that's at least a claim, right? It's a coherent claim. People you meet don't agree with this necessarily in all its aspects, but at least it makes sense on the blackboard, right? So let's think about this. I'm going to give you an example of a flute. Everybody knows what a flute is, right? You play it. Okay. How many people can play the recorder or the flute? Well, this thing, yeah. All right. Often it's a first instrument that you give a kid to learn how to play music and stuff. Yep. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to ask you who gets this flute. All right. This is an example taken from Amartya Sen when he sets up in his book The Ideas of Justice, and he says that basically this encompasses the social choice that people make in economies. Anybody know Amartya Sen? Okay. Anyway, economist, Nobel laureate, the Drummond Chair at Oxford. Okay. This little girl can play the flute. Ought she to get it? How many people, given that she is the only one of these three girls that can play the flute, think she should get it? Okay? She's the only one that can play the flute. Should she get it? Okay, so we've got some buyers. All right? This little girl has no other toys.
Yeah.
Nothing. Her parents gave her nothing. Everybody else has other toys. Even the one that can play it has other toys. Is that enough information for you to decide to give it to her? How many people, everybody else has plenty of toys. This girl has no toys. Should she get the flute? She could at least beat people with it and run around with it, use it as a sword.
I was thinking of her anyway, because she's like the only one who looks as sad. Like all of them look pretty happy besides the blonde.
This is the problem with economics. You got to hold things constant, and you're taking information from her expression. She is sad. She doesn't have any toys. So raise your hand if that is enough to give it to her. Okay? All right? Yeah, she wants it. She's going to use it as a sword.
What's the basis of your should? Just like our preference?
Your emotional response. Yeah.
Emotional or logical?
Emotional. Yeah.
So now we're both.
Yep. This little girl made it.
She can make another one.
She can make it.
She can make another one.
She can make another one.
If she's doing it to like give
But it's
away,
her property, so
she giving it to sell.
She made it.
I think she's better than pretty much. I couldn't really say. I mean, I chose to go with no choice. There's a lot of information we still don't know. Is it my flute or my recorder to give?
Yeah.
Or
This
am I
is,
taking it from the little girl?
we're always facing ignorance,
Is she-
right? We do not have any other information. That's when you're making policy, you're going to be largely ignorant of most of the things that you're going to affect. So I appreciate your objection. I just don't think it stops anyone from making these decisions.
Like, okay, in this is like, are you making a blanket because you're cold, or are you making a blanket because you want to like give it away?
Well, she wants the flute.
So she wants it.
Yeah, everybody wants it, right? She's not complicit in you taking it from her. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a problem.
She can keep that one and then make another one for the sad one. And then the other one.
Okay, so she basically what you're saying is that we're going to take it from her, or she can keep that one, but she has to agree to make something.
It would be nice of her to.
Well, yeah, but that's not the problem we're asking about.
Well, if we're giving her a flute and she can already make one, I think that's kind of.
No, she did make this one. Yeah.
Would she make others?
So any solution where she doesn't end up with the flute means you took it from her and gave it to one of the other girls.
I think maybe the flute might be very special
Yeah.
to her.
I was just going to say, one of the theories of property rights is if you use labor to augment something, and oftentimes just historically people have seen that as yours. Like, for example, if you come to a new land and you decide to farm the land, you're augmenting the land with your labor. So I think under that theory, it's sort of an informal norm of a property right because she augmented the wood with her labor.
Right.
That it would be hers.
Yeah, so you're not supposed to, the purpose of this example is not to have you walk away and go, yep, that's definitely the clear answer, right? Some people will. What we will say is that this person is a utilitarian, right? Because they think society will be made better off because she will make beautiful music. We started with some utilitarians in the room, but you guys got less vocal as we went to the other examples. This one is a very pervasive one. It's about dessert, right? Social justice. The fact that she has no other toys means that you instantly feel like it would be better if the outcome were different, if she had toys. Okay, so you're very interested in the outcome. That's important. That's a large portion of society. They don't care about it. If you think about this one, and this is the most compelling to you, you're likely to be some sort of economist or some sort of, you've got property rights on the brain. Okay? But this is what's underlying the production of society, and the justification for it is that if she's allowed to keep what she makes, then she might make another one. She might figure out a way to sell one. She might, that you're going to get more flutes in society. That's the only justification. Okay?
A system in which those that make things are permitted to keep them, they have a greater incentive to want to make more.
That's the claim, right? If you don't agree with that, you won't agree with this outcome. Right? Okay, so property rights give preference to the maker. Should you intervene in the market, right? Should you actually go in some of the time and change the outcome of the property rights, right? So property rights is the legal underpinning of a market. If a market's just sort of running because we have this legal system at a very abstract level setting up with property rights and individual choice, sometimes the outcome is not going to be what you desire. How often can you express your preference to change the outcome in a market without undermining killing the goose that lays the golden eggs, undermining the results of people's incentive to make things. How often can you do it? It's just an empirical question. How many times can you go in and redistribute before you kill the goose that lays the golden eggs? You might say more than we currently do. That's not really an answer, right? 60%, 70%, 80%? I don't know the answer. Okay, it's an empirical question. We have theories about it. We have to arbitrate between the theories. We've got to decide whether or not we can go and intervene more. But it's not a question of if, it's a question of what structure. Okay? So these are both economists. You can tell because they're wearing ties, right? Again, we have a wide range of disagreement over what type of tie. But they're both wearing ties because they know that they're economists and must be wearing ties. So clearly I'm not an economist today. Okay? It's not if markets. Everybody agrees that there needs to be some structure of property rights, some incentives, some sort of incentives to create information, create innovation. We all understand that we want rising wealth. There's nobody out there advocating, let's get poorer. Okay? Maybe environmentalist, I don't know. That's a mean way to interpret what they're saying, but I often feel that that's the case. But anyway. Is there a fully market-oriented economy in the world? Fully market-oriented. There is no intervention in the outcomes of the market. No. What would it look like? Would you want to live there? It really much depends, yeah. Depends on what our theoretical commitments will deliver in reality. Okay? How many people would want to live in a world where there's no intervention whatsoever on the outcome of what happens in a market? I'd like to run the experiment. I told you you can't say things like that, but right? So in other words, any sort of changes in distribution would have to come endogenously without some sort of intervention from a governmental organization. It would have to be charity, all kind of stuff.
There's so many maybes that would go into
Yeah.
equation.
These are big questions. Yeah, but we've already answered this question, right? There isn't one, so it's all theoretical. Could it happen? Is this possible?
Yeah.
Okay, how many people think it is possible that a world will exist at some point in the future where there is zero need for government to intervene to correct the allocation of the market?
Speaking on a planet-wide basis.
I'm willing to go within the solar system, right? So we can colonize Mars, we can colonize the moon, but outside of the solar system, I don't want to get into that abstraction. So you think that it could happen in the future? Do you think it could happen in the future? Some people are, okay. Is there a fully socialist economy in the world? Fully socialist. This would mean that we do not allow for property rights. Let's talk about the case of the missing toilet paper. Anybody know what country this is? Venezuela. Okay. All right. So this guy really looks like he wants toilet paper, both by the quantity that he's holding in his arms and the expression in his face. This guy looks like he spent a couple of days without toilet paper and is ready to have it back. Okay? In Venezuela, there was a great shortage of toilet paper last year. Now, whether or not there's actually a reason that there was a shortage or whether or not it was just a general panic doesn't really matter. What happened is when you went to the store, any store, there was no toilet paper on the shelf. So if you did see toilet paper on the shelf, what did you do? What this guy did. Take as much as they'll let you take. As much as you can carry. As much as you can get home without being tackled by someone else. What's that?
Actually, you can't. You have to buy like just 6 toilet paper.
Right, they have a limit because otherwise people would do this. Okay. Okay. So what this is called in economics is a shortage, and this is what it looks like on a graph. There's a price ceiling. You're not allowing prices to adjust, right? Prices in the black market are going up. I mean, if you've got toilet paper and I am in a situation where I desire or need toilet paper, there will be a price in the black market. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the official market. This is what we're facing, okay? So what we say here is that the quantity supplied is somewhere here, and the quantity demanded is here, and that the difference between these two numerical quantities, maybe this is 100,000 rolls and this is 70,000 rolls, we're 30,000 rolls short. Okay? So if you cap the price, you don't allow prices to change. Now, why wouldn't you allow prices to change?
Because, yeah.
Yeah, those poor people that didn't get to the store early, or the ones that can't afford it, are going to not have toilet paper. Well, in this particular case, no one has toilet paper because nobody has an incentive to stock it. Nobody has an incentive to go after it. They can't realize a gain from figuring out a solution to the toilet paper shortage. Another thing people aren't doing is rationing. If you've got access to the toilet paper, then you're going to use it. There's no incentive for you to hold it dear as long as you have a steady supplier. Okay? So there's still waste in this. If you don't allow prices to ration things, there's going to be a great deal of waste among the haves and nothing among the have-nots. Okay? What would happen, if there's a panic, right, as soon as it gets out that there's a shortage of toilet paper, everybody goes and buys the limit of 6 every time they possibly can. They go to multiple stores and buy 6, right? Whatever they can do. What would happen if this panic was completely imagined in a market that did not have a price cap? Right? So same situation, panic creates demand, a shift in demand, an increase in demand. What we have is a quantity supplied, quantity demanded at a lower than market clearing price. What happens is the shortage does 2 things. One, it starts conservation of resources. People are paying a lot more for toilet paper, so they're being more efficient with it. 2, suppliers start getting their employees to work overtime, driving extra trucks, getting toilet paper out there. Now, what this does is drive up the price. The price, because it's getting people to economize, people are not hoarding toilet paper. They're hoarding it to a lesser degree, which means there's more to go around. This moderates the panic, and hopefully the panic disappears and dissipates as a result of the shock that's happened to the price. Okay? This is called price rationing. Right? As price goes up, people conserve resources, suppliers bring more resources to market, the price goes back down, ultimately, in the end, because it was an artificial panic. Okay? I don't think Venezuela had some resource problem with getting toilet paper out to people. Somehow there was just a panic. But the panic persisted for months and months and months until ultimately the government wanted to take over the industry and start rationing toilet paper out to everyone. Toilet paper becomes something the market cannot provide, and it needs to be provided as a basic staple and necessity of the government. Okay? I'm arguing that there are certain institutions that are not associated with those types of panics and shortages, and certain institutions that are very heavily associated with it. And you look at continuing everything that happened in Venezuela, it's continuing to get worse as a result of constant intervention and constant price fixing and all that kind of stuff. You can look back at the 1970s in the United States. You can look at during wartime economies, the UK following World War II. You can go through any places where people are very concerned through legitimate redistributive purposes. They want the little girl without the flute to have a flute. They start intervening, they start doing this, and the whole thing goes, well, what would be associated with toilet paper? Right? Very quickly, yeah.
Has the toilet paper industry since been nationalized in Venezuela?
It's hard to say what it would mean to be nationalized because there's much more involvement of government. I mean, even electronic stores have been taken over, and they've rationed out electronics to people at very low prices, if not zero. They're trying to buy off popular support for the current regime. And it's infecting the economy of Venezuela. So my claim was that rising prices would curtail the shortage and check the panic. Okay, let's compare. I'm just going to finish up here. Let's just compare socialism and capitalism. Socialism is so this is the Communist Party, but socialism is an assumption of goodwill towards others, and it's a beautiful sentiment. It's an extremely noble and beautiful thing to think that at some point we're going to get rid of avarice and greed. Okay? I am completely on board with the beautiful romantic notion of this. In my lecture this afternoon, I'll start with the idea of being romantic about the economy. But you've got to get there first. And you know, you got to love Mao's idealism. He thought that he could get people through a couple of generations and they would no longer have avarice and greed. If you just gave people things without prices, without markets, without property rights, if you just gave people enough for a couple of generations, they would get used to the idea of trusting that it was going to be there, and they would no longer try to hoard or stab each other in the back and all that kind of stuff. It was going to be a wonderful economy, right? That's the plan, right? Yeah, that's exactly what happened in Eastern Europe. But after 10 years of trying this experiment in China, even Mao didn't have the willpower to continue it. And you guys, you can look up the estimates of the number of people that had to die in order to learn this lesson. Okay? The nice thing is that in a perfect socialist world, we would have everyone involved in decision making because no one would feel left out. Everybody would be entirely on board with the outcome because everybody would have their needs taken care of. There would be no reason to try to manipulate the system for your own reward. Okay? Now, if you're starting from that assumption that that's possible, then you're going to look at capitalism this way. The market rules, the property rights, the allocation of resources through the market is the assumption. That's good because it's a mechanism and it works. The only people that are ever going to affect change and the only people that are going to benefit from this system are the owners of capital. Right? Remember, this is the exact definition of capitalism given to us by Marx and Engels. You get an ever-shrinking number of people who conglomerate resources of capital and make decisions for the entirety of the economy. And you know, so you look at Peru, right? That's how a lot of people in Peru view Lima. It's the owners of capital. Everybody else has no say in what happens. Okay? I don't think this is an accurate way to think about the world, but it is a very, very popular way to look at the world. Okay? There's also a new alternative. You know, does this work? I don't think so. But it does work in the family. How many people in their family, I just want to, we'll finish here, but how many people in their family the phrase from each according to their ability to each according to their need works pretty well in your personal family, however you define that, whether it's 5 people, whether it's, you know, the cousins, whatever. That works pretty well?
I didn't get that. Yeah,
from everybody according to their ability to everybody according to their need. In other words, did anybody pay for your education? Okay. Anybody ever, you know, bought you clothes? Anybody ever fed you without making an explicit contract that when you are out of the house and can pay for yourself, you'll refund some of that expense? Yeah. Okay. So this principle works in the family. The question is, what scale? How much can we scale up? At what point do we start introducing strangers, people that we don't trust, people that will take advantage of our trust? At what scale? In Utah, they've got these wonderful organizations in every neighborhood. They're called wards, and they limit at 100 families. Once you get to 100 families, you got to break them down because otherwise the entire social coordination of the social, I don't know how you would refer to it, but the club that's formed in that religious community takes care of each other. They all execute tasks. It works really well. It's actually pretty amazing. Things get done. The sidewalks in front of the ward are cleaned every time it snows. It works like clockwork. But if you get over 100 families in that situation, you've got to break it up. Otherwise, you start getting people free riding. And it breaks down the incentive mechanisms and all that kind of stuff. So you can scale it up. The question is, how much can you scale it up? And the assumption of socialism is that that can be scaled up to a very large anonymous social order. And the claim of the people that advocate for markets say, once we get to a certain scale, the only thing that's even plausible is the market-based system. It's just a matter of scale. If you want to keep society really small, go read Rupke. He has ideas of reducing to a certain size of a polis, and everybody lives in a much happier way. And the response that I'm told Mises made to Rupke when he published this is, I read your work, it's very nice. I just want to know if you've made the list of all the people I'd have to shoot in the head. so that we could return to a world with that low population. Okay? So the question is, at what scale? And if you're going to have 7 billion people in the world, I have been convinced through my own research, the only way to do this is with markets. Thank you.